Welcome to the Erasing Shame podcast. And on this episode, I'm joined by Fiel Sahir. Did I pronounce that pretty good? Good enough. He gave me a thumbs up for those of you listening on audio. Fiel's coming in from New York City for this online conversation, and I'm here in Orange County, California. Fiel, welcome.
Thank you, DJ. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you. We can have a spontaneous conversation, unscripted and raw and unedited. So watch yourself.
No, actually, sometimes the best stuff comes through when it's unedited and raw. Yeah.
Yeah, I recall the last time I was in New York. You met up with me in downtown Chinatown, and we had a good meal and conversation. And this is the kind of thing we like to have here at Erasing Shame, a genuine, honest conversation about life as Asian Americans and what we experience as shame.
Yeah.
So I'm Chinese American. Describe your family background and what you think of when you hear the word shame.
Yeah. Indonesian American pastor's kid with the bi-coastal upbringing. So born in Portland, Oregon, and half raised in New York City. Shame is definitely a big factor that dictates how I grew up and church culture and all that. But I think what I think of when I hear the word shame, I think of chains. I think of things that keep people bound, whether it's systemic, whether it's mental, whether it's social, whether it's physical. I just think of how people get stopped from becoming who they really are and who God made them to be. And it makes me sad. And so that's why I do my best to live in the opposite way. Despite the fact that we all will always experience shame at some point. And then we bounce back. Yeah.
Well, there's plenty of conversation right there. So let's double click and drill down. You're a licensed clinical something therapist.
Master social worker. Yeah, not clinical yet. Yeah, hopefully one day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I've learned about mental health because of my own diagnosis and being an advocate, there are so many letters and acronyms and professionals and academics in this world of mental health. And I'm sorry, I can't keep it straight.
It's all good.
So as a social worker, what do you do similar and different than a typical licensed therapist that we seem to hear more from?
Well, let me start with this. I had a conversation with the wonderful historian and author Beth Allison Barr, and I happened to just share that I was a social worker, and she perked up because her husband's also a social worker, but he's also a pastor. And she said to me, I don't know how pastors do it without a social work degree. And for, if there's any clergy, any pastors listening, this is not an insult. It's rather, there is some stuff that we do in our training that one does not get in seminary. And for those listening, I'm also seminary trained. That, for example, the average congregation, if there were, for example, and this is not to shame this demographic, but if there was a 16-year-old girl that happened to walk into church pregnant on a Sunday, the chances are the church would freak out and not know what to do. But a social worker, because we are trained with knowing where our resources are and how to deal with situations and how to evaluate family dynamics and systems, for us, that's Tuesday. It's not something to freak out about. And if you do, that's okay, because it's not in your training. So to that end, in reference to what are some things that I do that a clinical social worker might do differently, basically, in general, as an LMSW, licensed master social worker, most people become a clinical social worker at some point because they do therapeutic clinical training and things like that. It's not the case for everyone. And to that end, social workers in general are very, very broad. So when people think social work, they might, the image that comes to mind, and it did to me until I found out what social work was I think of Lilo and Stitch, the movie, and how suddenly she was about to get taken away from her family. That's a stereotypical image of what people think. But social workers are incredibly, incredibly broad. which is why I came into the profession, because I'm quite the generalist, which is how God made me. And we're able to do many things. You can work with people that are young mothers that are experiencing domestic violence. You could work with Asian American elderly. You can work in government. You can work in hospitals. You can work in clinical settings where you're working with different populations that speak to you or that you want to connect with one-on-one, or in group settings. The possibilities are endless. And so to that point, even though I'm a licensed social worker, at the same time, it has given me such a framework through which to understand the world better, to be a better a husband, to be a better Christian, a better pastor's kid, a pastor, someone in ministry as well, because I do ministry amongst various communities. And it just gives me a frame and allows me to have a calm, non-anxious presence that sometimes is very characteristic of many churches and organizations, because the training just isn't there. And this is not a critique of seminaries. This is not a how dare you. It's just we have different trainings, right? Like, you can't get mad at a Japanese person because they don't know how to cook Chinese fried rice or whatever, right? It's different country, different things, but we all come together, and that's why we're a body. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know, and it's good to learn more about what social workers do. And as I'm learning about social workers, social work, it is a very broad kind of work, which means it's not very easy for us normal people not in that field to understand, because you do understand, generally speaking, you do understand how to navigate social services, government situations, home situations, family dynamics, and on top of that, the psychological and relational dynamics of what we live with, and then now to add on top of that our bicultural Asian American contexts, and cultures, and then often crisis, and then faith on top of that. And I'm not so sure the pastor or the church would freak out. I think they would smile politely and walk away.
Yeah, and I wouldn't blame them. It's a different animal. They just don't know what it is, and it's really hard to know what social workers do until you're connected to one, and even that might not be enough, just because it's so broad. I had no idea until I was in fact, like, just to share a bit more, I got into social work because of my therapist. I was actually in seminary at the time, and I was, taking classes with Tim Keller, and even going to have classes with him beyond that. And so I thought I was going to do ministry. In fact, the track that I had was, I thought I was going to become an itinerant speaker for the Indonesian American community or Asian Americans at large, or Christians at large, because I was doing a lot of preaching. And my therapist challenged me and straight up said, I don't know if that's where God really wants you to go. And I was really upset, because I was like, I'm going to study preaching with Tim Keller. Like, what could possibly be better than that? And I was deeply, deeply challenged, and had a whole crisis, and was trying to figure out, where do I go? What do I do? But she was actually right. And to that point, and then it just really expanded my understanding of the worldview. A lot of, if we look at things happening in our country and we're just blaming different people groups or whatever, that's easy to do if you don't know the underlying histories and things of how we got to where we are, right? Like, we don't look at Chinese people and just say, oh, they just all wanted to get up and move here. There's going to be a reason why people move places, and that's true of any group. If a certain group is known for X, Y, and Z, it's helpful if we investigate further why that comes to be, right? And ministry may not necessarily lead to that, right? Because we're trying to caretake for people's souls directly, and just give them their daily sustenance, right? If there's a family issue, we come in and we step in and we kind of try to do some sort of counseling. But social work might take a bit more of a holistic approach in analyzing the system and things along those lines. But yeah, so that's how I got into it, was because my therapist thought it might be a good idea, amongst other things.
Well, I'm glad you discovered this joy in your career so early because it's been a lifelong journey that I still have not found
Hmm.
what I'm looking for.
Hmm.
But I found work to do, and then I found joyful things to do outside of my paid jobs, like this podcast.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, at the same time, like for those listening, I'm in my 30s and I've gone through at least 9 career changes. I used to be a classical musician before I went
Wow.
into multiple. Yeah, I've been a tour guide, seminary trained, social work. I used to be a podcaster at one point before it was cool. Just a whole plethora of things. And one of the things that I'm being reminded of in this season, especially because me and my wife are expecting in the fall,
Mm,
that
congratulations.
thank you, DJ, and everything. A friend of mine reminded me that there's nothing is lost in God's economy, and I've kind of
Mhm.
understood that and known that, but it really does come together for the good of those that love Him. One real tangible response was recently I had the wonderful opportunity to lead the RCA, the Reformed Church in America, on a Asian American Sankofa journey,
Mm,
Asian American experience Sankofa journey. And so, for those listening as well, a Sankofa is basically a pilgrimage. It's a type of pilgrimage, specifically where we look to the past so that we can go forward. It comes from a Ghanaian
mm,
word from the Akan tribe. And so, leading him through that, I actually had the crazy chance to relive my former life as a tour guide at some point because we had to bus from New Jersey to New York City. And
mm,
on the bus, I got to reuse my tour guiding skills and also my ministry skills, and also have really tough conversations discussing race and mental health and how all those things come together as Christians. And so all that to say, like yeah, that's the one thing that I'm trying to get better at, accepting that everything does come together at some point. Like the lines will
mhm,
meet and then they'll come apart and they'll crisscross again. Yeah.
that's so cool. Well, you've said so much, and I'm like trying to decide which way I want to explore and discuss. Is
Yeah.
that your phone or mine?
Yeah, sorry. Somebody's ringing in the building. Sorry, one second.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So sorry about that. I think that was Amazon. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
And we can edit, so even though I said
No worries.
initially I wasn't edited, so this will be clean,
It's okay.
neatly clipped out. So you, as a social worker, and with your interests in faith and cultures, you've gotten to work with all kinds of Asian Americans.
Mhm.
So for someone who's Indonesian, what do you notice similar in the Asian American space, which tends to be dominated with East Asians, and part of that is just because of history and
Mm.
um, population demographics. That there's been more generations of Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans, and then the other Asians over recent history. Um, what are the connection points, and what are things that is a little bit different that you have to find your sense of belonging and connection with fellow Indonesians?
Yeah. Wow, that's quite the question. Um, there's a lot of similarities and differences. I think one of the big pieces is that it's very easy to not know our history. And so
Okay.
I know I've had conversations with Indonesian teens and they don't even know the city that their parents were born in. And
Mm,
that's not to say it's a requirement. It's just that it helps test people's understanding of who they are and things along those lines. So one thing that I will say, I won't say it's New York specific, but it's something I notice a lot in New York is
mhm,
there is a more of a New York identity than there is an Asian American identity, generally
mm,
speaking.
okay.
And in fact, in New York City, in the high school system, you're allowed to go to any high school in New York City in any of the 5 boroughs.
Hmm.
And so
Oh,
that leads to some very interesting combinations and formations, right? So, for example, me and my sister went to different high schools. And so the school I went to was mainly Asian, uh, and had everyone else. It had a huge population of white Americans, um, of Latinos and African American students. But because of systems and being in the honor, what we call the honor system, that led me to be mainly around other Asian students. And so I came out a lot more stereotypically Asian, whatever that looks like and means. And my sister, she went to a school across the street that was new. And so she had a lot of African American and Latino students in her high school. And so that caused her to be different than me in some ways culturally. And that's something I've noticed with Indonesian Americans in New York City in the churches that I've ministered in, that sometimes they're kind of confused because they're not Chinese, right? And at least nationally, now we present as East Asian, and most of us do in New York City do have Chinese heritage, but there's a reason for that. But in 1965, because of a communist purge and a lot of other things in the 60s, we had to change our names. So I have documents of that where my whole dad's side of the family, they had to legally change their names because they used to be Chinese names. And then anyways, so there's that whole history of that. And I'm forgetting the second part of the question.
Kind of differences and similarities. So you answer part of it, which is Indonesians find some sense of belonging more out of being New Yorkers and blending in with East Asians. But there's also part of being Indonesian where you enjoy your culture and being with people who are like yourself.
Right. Yeah, and that's the funny thing is that's something I'm very big into. I'm very big into connecting with other Indonesians, especially, and I think it's also a generational thing. And here's what I mean. For many of us growing up in the 90s, there weren't as many Asian Americans or Asians in the United States. And so as growing up in Portland, Oregon at the time, if you saw another Asian person, didn't matter what country they're from, you would cross the street, you would get their phone number and you would connect, right? And then in the 2000s, there was just so many people. You started to do that maybe with your own ethnic group and etc. But I've noticed amongst people that are younger than me, that wasn't really the case. In fact, people would go to school together and know each other was the other person was Indonesian, but they wouldn't talk until they got forced to because of class or whatever. So there was a little bit of that happening, anxiety. But also people just really trying to find out who they were themselves. And to that end, unfortunately, a lot of general Indonesian Christian cultural practices can be harmful to certain people. And so I noticed a lot of youth that I would work with, sometimes they just wouldn't want to be. They wouldn't want to be Indonesian because it was just too painful. There was too much of the pressure. The way the Indonesian language was used as a vehicle for correction. Now, the younger generation might say oppression, and I would have said that at one point as well. But there are some parents who might speak to their kids in Indonesian because it can be used in a commanding way, saying, clean up your room, but then they speak in English for the rest of the time, or they actually only speak to their kids in Indonesian because there's just like this level of like authority that comes with speaking the language. But I'm curious to see what other people might think or say. But also, generally speaking, American-born Indonesian Americans do not tend to speak the language, and I wonder if there's some pain and association with that. So there's a lot of similarities, but one big thing that I would say is that Indonesia itself is, without India and without China, we would not exist culturally, because Indonesia used to be a Hindu and Buddhist place. And Indonesia also is a relatively new concept within the past 100 years, because before that it was hundreds and hundreds of little kingdoms and princedoms and dukedoms and things like that, and then just eventually because of colonization got lumped into this one big conglomerate area. And I was just thinking about it the other day. If that was to happen in the Caribbean, that basically would mean that Cuba, Puerto Rico, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Nevis, the Virgin Islands, Venezuela would all be one big country. And that's basically what happened to Indonesia. But historically, we do have a lot of cultural roots from India. We don't touch people's heads. When we say thank you, we often do this with our hands. We'll put our hands together. And then sometimes we're culturally Chinese. Like we have a lot of Chinese food in our culture. Many people do red envelopes throughout the year, not just on Chinese New Year, things like that. But that's just the surface level of culture.
Sure. And here we want to open up safe space to explore aspects of shame as well. So you touched on quite a bit of that, changing your language, not even knowing history. And there's a level of shame involved there. And then living in America now instead of the context where it's historically mostly Buddhist and Hindu, but now Indonesia is like 90% Muslim. So that's a whole nother layer. And then I don't know how the influence of Christianity has been for Indonesians that immigrate to the U.S. And then, well, which aspects of shame stand out is felt the most with all those dimensions of life that we've explored?
I have two that come to mind. One of them would be that I am at least the third generation. I'm a third generation survivor of racial violence and bullying.
Oh wow!
So my grandfather, and this is a longer story, but I'll make it short. Basically, my grandfather is so his ancestors have been in Indonesia since the 1500s or so, right? And I have no way to verify this completely, but his ethnic group mixed supposedly when Zheng He came to Indonesia in that time period, and then they just stayed. But which means that his skin was brown colored, right? He was very, very dark skinned, and then he was adopted by a Chinese family, a Hakka Chinese family, and then moved to China in the 1920s, 1930s, and he grew up there and experienced a lot of hardships because of his skin color. They would call him names. They would call him Fankwe, which I'm told means rice ghost, because the idea was that because of his skin color, he's a lazy good for nothing. So he's just going to eat. He's just going to like nab people's rice, basically, as a rice ghost. I guess you could say a leech in English, we would say, right? And then my dad, growing up in Indonesia in the 60s, and so because he came out looking East Asian, that led to a lot of racialization and racism and bullying and a lot of fighting and sexual harassment to Indonesians in general, right? That would just happen on public transportation. It's very normal, unfortunately, because of skin color, because they could get away with it because it was okay to discriminate, which then led to the name changes and this overwhelming "we are not Chinese" feeling, right? Because to be Chinese was to be shameful and just all these things, whatever that meant. And that's a longer story that I can't get into here. And then coming to me as a young Indonesian American, I also did not want to have anything to do with Chinese anythings. And in fact, I was bullied in school. I got jumped. In fact, also I happened to be in Indonesia in 1998 when they had horrendous riots where unfortunately over 1,000 Chinese women specifically were targeted and assaulted and or died. And that was just one of many, but many people had to flee. And so somehow I survived that. And so the shame of my skin color was very deep for me. In fact, when I was 16 and I had the chance to go to Africa for a community service trip on a scholarship, despite the problematicness of that now, in that time period, I was really happy to go because the sun was very strong, and I was hoping that the tan would stay so that people would stop calling me Chinese. And ironically, there was another Asian on the trip, and he was Japanese, but they never once called him Chinese. It was only me. And to this day, on public transport, I'll walk past people, and they just happen to say the word Chinese or Chino or anything like that. And so a lot of the shame was racial. People attacking the fact that I was made in God's image and just happened to be Chinese. That was disturbing for them. And it's been on multiple continents, multiple countries. Yeah, that's one aspect. But another aspect would be in church circles, right? People wanting to grow up and being unable to have their own apartment, and so they have to live with their parents, which means that they have to uh, play music at church every Sunday. They have to follow all the rules. They can't have friends. They can't do X, Y, and Z. And these are just big, broad stroke images, but they are very real realities for a lot of Indonesian Americans I know, where anything they do is immediately scrutinized, and it's a big problem. And there is a lot of pain from the family and fear of parents, of parents in the community. In that they'll either it'll be contagious, or that the parents themselves are really disappointed at their child because they didn't achieve what they hope they would achieve.
This echoes back to how we started this conversation, that when you hear the word shame, it's like chained and it's confining, and you described how that comes from history and racism and bullying and family, and then the people around you that it sounds like doesn't give you much healing or support or freedom. So having grown up and that affecting so many parts of your body and your being, what has helped you and others get out of that shame and find healthy living as Indonesians?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question, and probably it's where the hope comes in. I'll share this. This is a tough one, but my journey into getting help was because someone told me that I was insane and deluded, and I didn't know what to do with that information. And my world shattered, and I didn't know what to do for 2 weeks. But thank the Lord, He led me to through one person to another, to a wonderful therapist for me, and who was multicultural, who understood all these things. And so I was able to explain to her what was happening at home and in my personal life and my thought life. And she was able to explain to me, okay, this is what's happening. Here's where God is. And how do we navigate all this stuff? Right. So she was able to really work with all the issues I was having personally with my parents, being a pastor's kid and all that stuff. But then on the other hand, throughout all that healing and reading wonderful books, what helped nail in the Asian American side for me was actually meeting up with Hawaiians. It was going to Hawaii and meeting up with people from there, that for them to be Christian and to be Hawaiian was one and the same. It wasn't because I have 3 tablespoons of Hawaiian, I have to do 200 grams of Christian, right? Like it wasn't a measurement. It wasn't a baking formula. It was Jesus loves me. He loves my culture. And therefore God is there first, which many may know from Don Richardson's books, Eternity in Their Hearts, that God is at work in each culture, and that God did not make any a person to be Vietnamese because he just wanted someone to suffer and hated them, right? Like he doesn't just add you to this ethnic group because he just wants you to suffer. Now you can look at it that way, but that's going to be a very painful life process and stressful. And so anyways, being around these Hawaiians where I saw them living who they were and who God made them to be and going where God wanted them to go, it showed me, oh, wow, to be Asian American is a good thing. God is there first. He is at work. So what are the things underneath the surface that I have not yet discovered where God's grace was as well? In the 1900s or 1800s, when the Chinese first arrived on these shores, or when the Filipinos were here before them in Louisiana, and so on. The stories are endless that God was at work in the midst of suffering, in the midst of horrible things. And then he's at work now. Right now, there's a huge wave of many Asian American leaders meeting together again, because this has also happened in the 90s and early 2000s. But people are recognizing that let's come together. Let's come together and minister together, work together, learn together. And I think God is doing something new here. And I'm excited to see where that goes for people at large, not just people in ministry, because this is for everyone.
Amen. Well, so good talking with you. I really resonate, and I'm grateful that you've found community. You found a value part of faith, how that has helped you through a lot in connecting with different kinds of people, even Hawaiians, being part of this AAPI umbrella that we have. And it just dawned on me, Indonesia is a huge island country, over 17,000 islands. So
Mhm.
the island vibe perhaps also connects.
Yeah.
And then for us as Asian Americans coming together and valuing each other in a way that perhaps is a bit deeper than just a multicultural context.
Mhm.
And then as we have honest conversations like this, appreciating our heritage and history, and then one another, Hawaiian, three H's, has been so good. So I'm hopeful that this um, story, this conversation will be helpful to others as they listen. And as we close out, is there any place that you would share right now in terms of your socials or your website that people can connect you with if they like to have a one-on-one conversation off the record?
Yeah, I totally invite that. The best place to visit would be to go to pearldive.net, which is the Fuller Seminary's Asian American Christian History Institute Substack. And so that's where I work currently. And that's the best place to find me, because my name might be a bit hard to spell. But also because we're featuring many stories from the Asian American church over time, stories of solidarity, whether it's what's happening in the Burmese American church, the history of Burmese Christianity, the history of South Asian, specifically people from Kerala and Philadelphia. There's a plethora of resources and things on our website, but also you can contact us there, and I'd love to connect with anybody that wants to connect.
Excellent. And all those links will be in our show notes at erasingshame.com. Thank you for listening and watching this conversation. Thank you, Fiel, for being with us on this episode.
Thank you, DJ.